So when I got close to the bank, I pulled the mask down and I ran in and everyone on the ground and, and started screaming and blah, blah, blah. And I jumped the counter, gave the gals the bag, said, give me that money, and screaming. And I think I got away at like $20,000. So I ran out of the bank and went like half a block, got in the truck and took off. The next day on the front page of the newspaper, it said, bank robber leaves shoes behind, and had a picture of those penny loafers in the snowbank. I go to Chicago. My wife was calling me, I was calling her, and she's, they're looking for you. And I said, yeah, I know. And, talking about my son. Decided to turn myself in. The rest is history.
A man who has spent his youth pursuing a life of crime decides to hand himself over to the federal justice system. With hopes of redemption and the beginning of a new life, he could not imagine that his criminal career has barely begun, or that he would spend countless years in the tutelage and friendship of some of the nation's most notorious underworld figures. This is the extraordinary story of Robert Gene McNeese.
It's just crazy,
You're doing better than most people from jail. So what are you going to do with the money, though? You're in there for life, right?
Yeah, but I had responsibility. I still took care of my kid and stuff like that,
Oh, that's right. You still got all this.
I had a house and, I gave it away, I didn't spend it,
But that makes me even more of a man that you're still taking care of family and stuff, and you're doing it from behind bars. There's people that act like they can't do it, and they've got every advantage.
Right.
And they're not in jail.
Well, you're right. Yeah, I didn't realize how many lazy people there were until I started my own business after getting out. I work 7 days a week, and I like it. It don't bother me.
Yeah.
But I can't find people that want to work 5 days a week, But yeah.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat.
Yeah, it's just insane.
There are a few things that I find more rewarding than partnering up with talented, high-energy people, whether it's in podcasting, manufacturing, or any other endeavor. When my friend Bill Stacks called and suggested that I do an episode on Robert, I was immediately impressed with his pedigree as a man who'd spent considerable time locked up with some of the more famous mob bosses of our generation. In the end, I'm even more impressed with his level of intelligence, drive, and ambition. But even these qualities pale in comparison to his affable demeanor, his quiet, unassuming reserve for a man who's rubbed shoulders with some of the toughest guys to lead the underworld, and for a man who's about to tell you a story that is likely to blow your minds.
And that is when I ran into my first mobster.
The Urban Dictionary has defined a term to describe the process of making a person extraordinary.
That was Christy Tick.
A traumatic trial by fire that will define not only their future, but the essence of who and what they are to become.
Nikki Scarfo, Vic Amuso, Sammy the Bull, Fat Tony Salerno, Tony Ducks.
I'm William Cross, and this is Xtraordination.
My name is Robert McNeese. I am from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and I was born August of 1965. We lived on the outskirts of town, with like a little farm, country-style home. I was raised predominantly by my stepfather, Bob Goddard, who's passed away now, but my mother, she had not such a healthy lifestyle as a child. I had her first child when she was 14. She subsequently had 10 children, and they were spread out all over the place. I've never lived with all of my brothers and sisters under one roof, and I think I probably lived with my real mother maybe a year of my entire life, where I actually lived in the same house with her, unless I was a child that I don't remember, as a baby. But I've always was in really close contact with her. That being said, my mother and father were divorced when I was 3 weeks old, and she met Bob Goddard, and they got married, and we lived there with Bob and her. My earliest childhood memory would be, I think I was 5 or 6. We had those big yard darts. Back in the 70s, they sold these yard darts. They had a little circle, you throw it on the grass, and you throw these darts that were pretty wicked looking. About 10, 12 inches long. They had a little fan thing on the back, you throw it, and a big metal piece of steel, like an arrow thing on the front of it. I was running, and my brother, he threw the yard dart up in the air to try to get in that little circle, and got it right straight in my head, and it stuck in there. For some reason, I always remember that, and my brothers, we kind of laugh about it. I remember laying on the porch, and then my stepdad running down the gravel road with me in his arms, And I could remember that yard dart bouncing on my head. I was thinking, just like surreal. But it healed and everything was fine. That's probably my earliest memory of being a child. My mother, she left him, but she had a child with Bob, my little sister Sean. And Bob raised Sean and I up until like the 6th grade, 7th grade. Then I went to my real father's, who lived up in Minnesota. So I went up there and stayed up in St. Paul, Minnesota for approximately 8 months, maybe 6 months. I had started school up there as Maplewood Junior High School. After 6-8 months, I decided to go back to Iowa. I didn't tell anyone, so I guess it would be called running away. And I went and stayed with my oldest brother, who was of age at the time, and he had a girlfriend, and he had a son, my nephew EJ. And I think I was like 13, maybe almost 14. When I left Bob's house and went to Minnesota with my father, my mother took my younger sister Sean and moved her in with her. Then my mother wanted to get married again, and there was some issue with Sean and her future husband. So Sean went back to live with Bob, her real father, and they lived in a small town in Iowa. I went down and stayed with Bob too. For about another year I stayed with him. Then me and Sean decided to run away again. And I was 14. She, I think, was 13, maybe 12, something like that. She was, younger. But went and stayed in an apartment that my mother lived in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I guess that's my first adventure as a child. I lived in the bars as a child. Bob Goddard operated a bar. And we lived upstairs, and I'd get up in the mornings and sweep and mop the floors and stock the bar before school. My mother's best friend was a lady named Bee, and she had 4 sons. And one of the sons was like a hustler, sold jewelry and Rolex watches and things like that. So he was in the bar that my mother was at one time, and I was in there. And he asked if I wanted to do any work for him, if he had some work, if I needed to earn some extra money. And I said, sure. I had known him my entire life because they were friends of the families. So, I do odds and ends for Jody. Well, he came and asked if I wanted to go for 3 or 4 weeks in the summer to work on the carnival on a event thing that he had. I said, sure. At this time, I was kind of like, had made my own decisions, My little sister came with me too. We actually worked for Elvis Presley's father. We worked for the estate of Elvis Presley. His father was the executor of his estate. I guess he was kind of a crook too. He wouldn't let a nickel go by. If somebody wanted to use Elvis's likeness or anything, he had to get a piece of the action. This was in 1978, I think, 79. It was like after his death. And what it was like a giant semi, and in the middle, the stairs came down, and you'd give me a little ticket and go up the stairs, and you go to the right, and there's a wax figure of Elvis Presley as a child. And then you'd walk a little bit further down, and there's another figure of him in his military uniform. And then there's another one with a guitar. And then like his last show was out in Vegas. He had the big rhinestones and that big jumpsuit. They had that one there. And then the last wax figure was Elvis laying in a coffin, like with his arms crossed. The line was 3 blocks long. And the women would beat so hard on the glass where the coffin was that they shattered it. Because he was in there dead, oh, Elvis, you're dead, It was crazy. It really was insane. It was like, man. And they had to get bulletproof glass in there. They had speakers on the outside blaring his music. Got a tour of Graceland, behind the scenes. Met Elvis's father maybe 3 times. Like he would come and he brought a truck with 3 different cars on it that were Elvis's actual cars that we had outside of the wax museum. He thought it'd bring in more customers, So I got to ride in the back seat of one of his limousines, so that was pretty cool, That's big shit when you're a kid, I was 14, and that is when I ran into my first mobster, and I didn't know he was a mobster, and that was Danny Marino. So Danny Marino was a alleged Gambino soldier at that time, but he was the manager or I'm not sure what his position was there. He was a big shot with this carnival, and Danny would be around and he'd buy me and my sister lunch, and just just a nice guy. And that was my first encounter with a mobster. About that time, went back and I started doing, like stealing stereos out of cars, living at a friend's house. I was 15 years old. And I got in trouble with the police, like a burglary or something. I can't remember what it was for. It was something stupid, I'm sure. When I was on my own and staying with my buddy, and we'd go out to the farmhouses and break in, and just things like that. So I went to Eldora Training School, which is like the juvenile prison. I went there for a year. It was okay. It was like a big dormitory style facility. You have a little locker room area. You change and shower and all that. And the dormitories upstairs is where you lived at and watched TV. And I had a job in the paint shop, took painting classes there. I mean, it was just, a bunch of young kids running around causing grief. But yeah, I did like a year there and got out. Started running the streets, doing bad things. Had an incident. Me and my friend Danny, we went to go get some pot, some marijuana. And back then it cost $7.50 for a quarter ounce. I'm not sure what it is nowadays, but it was dirt cheap back then, compared to now. And it was this black fella that was supposed to be a friend of ours, we thought. But I gave him the $7.50 and he went into the bar in town and he didn't come out. So we're sitting there, in Danny's car, and I'm wondering, man, when's he coming? After about close to an hour, I decided to go in there. Mind you, this is back in, it was many, many years ago. It was the only black bar in the town. I was nervous, but I go in there and he's sitting at the bar with like 3 or 4 guys, and I walk up to him and he says, "What do you want?" I said, "Hey, you got my money, He acted like he didn't recognize me, going, "Hey, get out of here. I don't know what you're talking about, kid." The buddies were all gritting on me, all mean and stuff. So I said, man. So I left, and I had done a burglary, a week before that, and had some guns that I got from there. So I took 2 guns, and I went back to the bar and opened up the door and just pulled both of the pistols out and just started shooting and shot 3 of them and told that dude I wanted my money back. Like about, a week and a half later, I'm outside of a telephone booth that's in a parking lot. So I pull up to it, I use the phone, hang up, I get back in my car, and I just put it in drive and the windows down. And it's like on TV, this detective comes up to my car window and has some papers in his hand and says, "Robert McNeese, we have a warrant for your arrest." And so, of course, I floor it and leave. Did a high-speed chase with him. It was a good one for about 25 minutes. Driving a Plymouth Fury, and the front tire came off of it, going around a corner, and it just sparks everywhere. And so I just discombobulated it for a second and opened up the door and get out. And this detective, as soon as I got out, he was up there on me and he grabbed me and threw me to the ground and started to beat me in the chest with his gun, talking about, "You could have killed me." It hit me so hard where it was cutting it, it was bleeding. And so because of that issue with the cops, they dropped all the charges of the bar incident. So I got lucky there. About a week after that, I get busted for breaking into a place, and I go back to Eldora. I got out when I was 18, out of Eldora, and got in trouble immediately and went to state prison till I was 20. And I meet a girl. I met her through a guy that I knew who was incarcerated. And she started writing me while I was in prison. And that's when I met her. But she was writing me for like 6 months before I got out, just pen pal thing. And then when I got out, I moved in with her and we got married. And 6 months she was pregnant. I wasn't working, never had a job at all. I was selling drugs or robbing people, just being a knucklehead. My son was just born, and it was right after Christmas. I think it was like in February. And then I robbed a bank. While I was incarcerated, I was with a guy by the name of John Oliver from Springfield, Illinois. And he's originally from Iowa. Me and him were buddies in the prison. His brother-in-law was a guy named David Grandstaff. And David Grandstaff and John Oliver, they were indicted in Arizona for the largest cash armed bank robbery in history. They got like $3.6 million or something like that in cash. A partner of theirs, Bruce Finnemore from Iowa, he gets pulled over driving a Corvette, and he had $100,000 on the front seat. And so they arrest him, and he immediately cooperates and points the finger at John and Dave. They wrote a book about the whole incident called The Gang They Couldn't Catch. Believe it or not, John and Dave were found not guilty by a jury. Yeah, John was a good dude, but he used to tell me all about how to rob banks. And, when we'd walk the prison yard, say, this is how you do it, blah, blah, blah. And all, and I did, full of a million questions. So after I was out for a while, and, we got out when I was 20, I said, man, I got hurting now. I need some money. I said, I'm going to try that. And so I got these size 13 penny loafers. I only wear size 9, a trench coat. And then I had a Spider-Man mask up, a stocking cap over that. So when I got close to the bank, I pulled the mask down and I ran inside and I pulled out 2 pillowcases and gave them to the tellers and said, give me the money. and started screaming and blah, blah, blah. And see, I didn't have a gun, but John had always told me to make a big noise, make noise. So I ran in and everyone on the ground. And I jumped the counter, gave the gals the bag. Said, give me that money, and screaming. And I think I got away at like 20,000. So I ran out of the bank, and it was snowing out. I left the penny loafers and went like half a block, got in the truck and took off. The next day at the front page of the newspaper, it said, bank robber leaves shoes behind, and it had a picture of those penny loafers in the snowbank. Yeah, so I go to Chicago and stayed at a hotel up there and for a week or so, and my wife was calling me, I was calling her, and she was, they're looking for you. And I said, yeah, I know, and, talking about my son. So I decided to turn myself in. And that's what I did. I turned myself in with my attorney, a couple days later. The rest is history. So I get a federal case for bank robbery, and they sentenced me to 105 months in federal prison. I was nervous wreck. I was scared. This is how it works. When you're in state prison, they talk about the feds, how tough it is, and, blah, blah, blah. But then when you're in the feds, they talk about how tough the state, it's just vice versa. So, but I didn't know that at the time. I was nervous, I was scared, and I got to portray that image of a tough guy, and, but a lot of things was going through my head. So I'm in the county jail, stay there like 10 months. And I was finally sentenced. I was the first person sentenced under the anti-terrorism crime, where they changed the sentencing guidelines, where they went from parole to doing 85%. So I had to do 85% of 105 months. I went to a prison in Wisconsin. It was a medium security facility, and they take you on a bus. It looks like a Greyhound bus, but it's a Bureau of Prisons bus. So they picked me up, and it took this place in Wisconsin was like 4 hours from Cedar Rapids. They drove us to Chicago, spent the night in Metropolitan Correctional Center in downtown Chicago. Then we got on a bus again in the morning, and we went all over picking up prisoners, and finally got to this place in Wisconsin like 5 o'clock at night. I get off the bus, you see a doctor real quick, see if you're okay, and they check you off. Then you see like a detective that's in charge of the prison. So you see him, and are you scared? Is there anybody going to get you? They ask you these questions. You say no. Then they release you to the yard, and you go to the unit that you were assigned to. And I was assigned to a wood unit. And so they send you off. They give you a bedroll with a blanket and 2 sheets and a pillowcase and some shampoo, and they point to the unit you live in. So here I am with all these guys, 1,000 guys walking around staring at me. I've got this roll under my arm, and I'm walking down this long sidewalk. I mean, it's like a block long. And I'm thinking, man, this place is big, and these look some mean people here. And all of a sudden I hear, Bobby, screaming at me. And I see this older fella walking towards me. So I stop, and he comes up and shakes my hand, gives me a hug, goes, oh, remember me? And I said, no, and it was Danny Marino. And he remembered who I was. And so he goes, yeah, and I talked for a minute about that. And he said, where'd they put you? And I told him wood unit. And he says, oh, he goes, that's great. He goes, I got a buddy of mine that he's looking for a roommate. He goes, let's go talk to him. That was Christy Tick. He received a 100-year sentence along with several other individuals for being part of the commission. He was the alleged consigliere for the commission. So he had 100 years. But in the end, he finally beat his case and was released. And I became Christy's roommate for a couple years while in Wisconsin. He passed away, unfortunately, but he lived a great life. He was 100 years old, I think, when he passed away. So he passed away a free man, which was a good deal. But we used to chit-chat, and I never asked anybody that I met through the years about their illegal activities or if they did something or didn't do something, because I learned as I got older, you don't do that. But with Christy, I'm a young punk kid. I'm full of questions. I ask him all sorts of how many guys you killed, and did you shoot people, and stuff like that. He'd just look at me like I was crazy, because you don't ask people those questions. But I didn't know any better, so. He actually knew guys like Lucky Luciano, the old-time mobsters, the original ones, I guess. And I always found that fascinating that he, crossed paths with these guys, these famous gangsters. So I was impressed with it. And he owned a bar, I think it was called the Walnut Club in New York. He's telling me about in the bar, he had pictures of him with all these old-time gangsters. Frank Costello, he kind of idolized Frank Costello. Very quiet. I mean, quiet, and he talked with a real raspy voice. "Hey, how you doing?" Because he smoked these cigarette Dunhills, and he would just smoke one after another, he told me, when he was free, and he quit when he came to prison. So he hadn't had a cigarette for like 4 years when I met him, but his voice was real raspy. You know, a gentle grandfather is what he reminded you of, you know. But he kind of like opened my eyes to prison and you know, don't trust people, and you know, you do things this way and that way, and be a gentleman, and you know, he kind of, I think, set me on the path of you know, who I am today, as far as the way that I respect people, and I try to, you know, do the right things, and you know, be as polite as possible, things like that, you know, things that don't hurt you to do, you know. And so I stayed there for about a couple of years. There was another guy in there named Biff Halloran. He owned a Halloran Hotel in New York, and real wealthy guy, but he was in there for mob activities. Not sure what he actually did, but a very smart businessman. And he got me started doing schooling. So I took a bunch of classes. I discovered that I liked creating things, like, you know, marketing campaigns, things like that. And so I started numerous ventures while incarcerated, and had some that were some pretty good money makers, and some that weren't, you know. But I had all these mob guys that I'd be hanging with. You know, in federal prison, you predominantly hang with who your clique is, or whatever, who your car is, or, you know, all these different things. But I hung with the Italians from New York, and that whole time that I was incarcerated, that's who I was with. So I'd be getting advice from all these guys, and then, you know, they'd say, do this, do it, and, you know, they'd be making a joke about it, you know, but it made me do my time a lot better, and I got pretty smart at it. I get transferred from Wisconsin, and I go to Atlanta, Georgia, USP Atlanta. Get off the bus. Again, it's the Bureau of Prisons bus, where it should take, you know, 6 hours to fly from Wisconsin to Georgia. It took like 3 weeks to get there, you know. Stayed here for a week, here for 2 days, another jail for a day, and, you know, they just bounce you around. They used to call it diesel therapy back in the day, but it took me about 3 weeks to get to Atlanta. Pulled up there in that prison. It's in the heart of the ghetto. It's on McDonough Boulevard in Atlanta, Georgia. And there's a chicken shop and a liquor shop right there across the street from the prison. And it's just like, wow. And again, the same kind of treatment. You know, you see a doctor, make sure you're healthy, and you see a psychiatrist, make sure you're good, and security guy, make sure you don't have any problems. So I get let out in the yard. Well, as I get out from the shoe area where they have, you know, the new people coming in, as I walk out, 2 guys come up to me and introduce themselves, and it was Vic Amuso and Mike Tassetta. Vic Amuso was the alleged boss of the Lucchese crime family, and Mike Tassetta was the alleged underboss for the New Jersey fraction of the Lucchese crime family. And they came up very friendly, gave me a hug, and had a big sack full of cosmetics, you know, shampoo, soap, deodorant, and some coffee, you know, just, you know, care packages is what they do for all new guys. I knew a lot about Vic through Christy, because Christy is the one that brought Vic into the life. I believe that that's how it went down. I'm not 100%. I didn't ask her that. But Christy was like his guy. You know, I mean, they never spoke a bad word about him. And so Christy had sent word to Vic that I was coming there and to look out for me. Vic says to me, Christy has never asked me or anyone that I know of to look out for anybody, you know, that's in prison. So you must be pretty close to him for him to do that. And so I explained, you know, I said, yeah, you know, he taught me how to make pasta. I didn't know how to make none of that stuff. So, but yeah, we used to cook and do all that. And so me and Vic became very close, real close. I mean, I guess I'd say he was my best friend when I was in prison, and we walked the prison yard every day together. And so, yeah, we got real close to Vic. Vic's very intelligent. He surrounds himself with guys that are intelligent. At least he did it while in prison. And so he encouraged me to continue education, and he would help me with my businesses. Dumb things like I did a dating service. And this was back before they had computers or anything like that, you know. Back then, you'd send X amount of dollars, and you'd get a list of like 10 beautiful women, you know, that want to meet you. So I made up this little thing. It's 3 pages. Would you like to change your life? Are you tired of the 1-800 dating lines? Let me help you, and you know, that kind of bullshit. And so I got a hold of a list broker in Chicago, Brian Hoyka. You know, I'm in prison, but I'm still using the phone and stuff. So I told him what I was doing. He said, he goes, you want some hot list date lines, addresses and stuff? I said, yeah, I guess. He sends me these lists. They cost me 10 cents a name. And I sent out 1,000 of them with the 3 pages, and I charged them $29.95. And so I had this little thing they had to fill out an application, their height, weight, and all that. They would send it back with either a check or cash. And most of the time it was cash because credit cards weren't that big of a deal back then. So I did 1,000, and on an average mail out like that, it was 2-3% is pretty good, it's the average. But I got like 35 or 36% on the first mail out. So I called Brian up. He goes, I got like about 250,000, 500,000 names. I said, okay. I says, well, let me get 10,000 this time. So I did 10,000, and I got in the 20% range. And it's like crazy. Because what I was doing was for the women, I would tell Brian I need 250 names of females that are between 25 and 30, 250 between 30 and 35. And so I do it by their age and match them up. I was having someone do this for me on the street. They were getting the money, we're supposed to have an account. Well, what they were doing was all the money from the envelopes that was cash, they put in their pocket and not fulfill the order. And I wasn't aware of this. So everything's going good. I mean, they got this dating service. Everyone in the joints laughing at me. I'm making good. I'm like 24 years old. I'm making, 20 or 30,000 a month. So I'm doing good. Next thing I know, they call me to the visiting room. So I go into the visiting room, and here comes 2 gentlemen. They come up to me, and they introduced themselves. They were postal inspectors. They said that I was defrauding customers. I said, whoa, what do you mean? Because they threw me for a loop. I didn't know it. And so they said that I wasn't fulfilling orders. I was just taking their money. And I think they genuinely believed me, because I didn't know. This is, I have a friend that does it down there, and he, gets paid. And I said, but I will take anybody that complained, take care of it, and make sure it's all straightened out. And I did. So at the end of the day, my couple $100,000 that I had saved was gone for, to take care of the postal inspectors and all that. But I did several of those while incarcerated. And the bad thing is they stayed on top of me then after that. I was like getting letters from people that work for Playboy and Jim South, who owns World Modeling out in California. These are just guys that I was introduced to, that I was doing business with. And so they were putting heat on them, and it was just crazy. All because of a dating service. So I'm in prison with Vic, and I'm starting to meet other guys, and I get indicted. I get indicted in Tampa, Florida. Importation of heroin is what my charge was. And I think money laundering. I had several charges there, but the big one was importation. And I had, 5 months left before I was supposed to be released. So they fly me to Tampa, Florida, take me in front of the judge, and I'm indicted, formally charged, and I go to trial. The guy that cooperated against me was a Gambino guy by the name of Jimmy Spizzato. He set me up so that he, got some drugs. Mind you, I'm in prison, so I didn't see him or touch the drug or anything like that, but I had put people together. But he took the drugs or gave them to the cops or however they do that. So they had a strong case, but I still went to trial anyway. And, I was found guilty and sentenced to life. I had life plus, I think it was 100 years. Young kid, life sentence, I'm torn to pieces. And I remember, going into the shower in the jail, Hillsborough County Jail, my first day of trial. Because, the first day is that you have your defense attorney gets up and tells the jury what a great guy you are. And then this prosecutor gets up and tells the jury what a piece of shit you are, and it just sounded like I was a bigger piece of shit than I was a good guy. It's just, he made me sound like I was just a horrible, horrible guy, and I'm like, man. So I went in the shower and I cried. That was the only time I cried, because I cried right then in the shower. I was like, man, it was sad. It was a bad situation, and I knew I was facing a tough road. And they only busted them with 10 pounds of heroin. That was what they charged me with, was 10 pounds. Well, then come sentencing, because with these recordings and stuff they added, they say that if I did it for 18 months, they averaged 200 pounds a month, times 18 months. That's how I got a life sentence. There was no 18 months and all, so that was pretty discouraging. But I had a good shot at beating that case, and I didn't, because they took all of my lawyer notes, all my investigative notes and stuff from my attorney and private investigator, and turned them over to the government, and the government didn't give them to the court to check, they're supposed to peruse each page to see if there's some stuff in. They said that I was attempting to put on a fraudulent offense. That's why they took the documents. And that was it. That's all they said. Well, even if you're putting on a fraudulent defense, then an outside prosecutor is supposed to come in and look at the documents and say, yeah, they, boom, and none of that went on. So I had a good shot at it. And I, took it on the chin and got a life sentence. And went back to prison. So I go back to prison. I'm in Atlanta, and I'm with a guy, Ferris Alexander. Ferris Alexander was the porn king. I get into talking to him. He's 80 years old or 75 years old. He's an older guy, and always sitting by himself on the benches outside. Nick would always say hello to him. So I'd sat down with him one day, and we started talking, and then I discovered he's the porn king. He's telling me he's from Minnesota. I told him I was from Minnesota. As a child, I lived there for about 8 months or something. My dad lived up there. And so we started talking, and he started talking about this pornography and what he was doing. And he used to date like Marilyn Chambers. I mean, they have Adult Video News. It's a big organization for the pornography industry. And they have a Hall of Fame, which is recognized by everybody, right? And who's the first person ever to be inducted? Him. So he's in the Hall of Fame for pornography. He was from Lebanon, Palestinian guy. But a little short, fat guy. And his business sense was top notch as far as pornography goes. So I became a pornographer in prison. I started buying, Ferris was selling me tapes for $3.50 a piece. And again, no internet was around yet. So if you wanted to have pornography, you either had to make it yourself or you had to go to a bookstore and purchase it. And the average cost back then for a cassette, a 60-minute film, was $60. He was selling to me for $3.50. So again, I did a little brochure like I did with my dating service, a little brochure, and had everything fixed up real nice and sent them out to a friend of his. And that guy was like, I don't know, a printing guru or whatever, and came back and it looked like I was a pro at it, And so I did a mailing with these. I got it from Brian, again, this list broker. I got lists of individuals that were calling the 1-900 sex lines that they had, or that bought adult items through the mail in the last 30 days. So I targeted them people with the mail out, and I got like a 12% return. I'm giving them 3 movies for $59.99. So they're getting a hell of a deal. So they thought, So I started fulfilling orders with these guys. Set up a little shop outside the street, and Ferris had his people mail in the videos, and so it was like a little mail order company I started doing that. So then I got a list from Brian of adult bookstores across the country that bought videotapes. And so I would call them up and then try to sell them videos. And I was selling them to them cheap, $14, $13 a piece. Everyone else was selling like $25, $30 a piece. So I cornered the market in about 2 months. I started with one person, making phone calls. I had 20 people making phone calls. And it got pretty big. And that's how I got introduced to the guy, Jim South. He has 99% of all the adult entertainment contracts in the United States. And so he's a good guy to know. I said, yeah, Ferris, you gave me your number, told me to call you if I needed any advice and all, And Ferris had reached out to him and told him about me. And so he was very helpful. So I had all these old-time guys that were top-notch in the porno industry giving me advice, helping me out. And that was pretty cool, I had some doozies. I sold cookies that were gold and diamond encrusted cookies. And I sold a box of 6 of them for $450 a piece. And then people ate them up. They bought the hell out of them. Just crazy, So everything's going well. I'm porno king in Atlanta, and I'm rocking and rolling. And me and Vic are hanging out. And, a lot of guys are coming in and out. So I meet a lot of guys in Atlanta. From little Nikki Scarfo, that ran the Philadelphia crime family. And he's different. Nikki Scarfo was in ADX. When he got in trouble, he got sentenced to life or 40 years. I don't remember what he had, but put him in ADX Supermax. So he goes there, and I think he was there 5 or 7 years. I don't recall, but a long time. And when you leave orientation, you're wearing what they call bus pants. There's no zippers or anything. It's just a pair of like stretch pants, right? And they're brown, and you're wearing like a hospital shirt that's brown. And so I seen him by the commissary, I think it was, and I was with Vic. And here he comes up, and he's just a little skinny old, he looked like he weighed 80 pounds. gives Vic a hug. Well, Vic introduces me and gives me a hug, and hey, how you doing? And I had heard stories about him. I had actually met him 5 times prior to this, but I didn't really get to see him because he was in the hole. And Vic had sent me up there with care packages to, just take him things that he needed. So that was the first time, I guess, freedom for him was about by the commissary. So yeah, I just became a friend of his. And he had a co-defendant there, Faffy Ainella, who I believe was a captain in his group. And me and him used to walk a lot, talk a lot, and just hang out. And then there was Barney Palermo. I think he was or is the alleged boss of the Genoveses. Barney was real quiet. He's like a ruffled guy. He's kind of like, his hair was always out of place, but he's a good guy. And he was real big into the law. So him and I would be in the legal library all the time. So I was into the law pretty big, I'd study in different cases and things like that. So but I used to sit with him and chat with him about law and stuff, and he was cool. There was some other guys. Vic Arena was there. Vic Arena was Colombo, and then Patty Amato, his co-defendant, who was a skipper, I believe, was in the prison with us. So those two hung out together. They were real tight. So we all just walked around, and Sal Merlino of Philadelphia was there, who was an arch enemy of Nikki Scarfo's, because his son is Skinny Joey Merlino, who is the alleged boss of the Philadelphia. So there was a big thing about that. Nikki comes out of ADX screaming about, I'm the boss. I guess in that lifestyle, if you're part of a group and the boss is the boss, the only way to dethrone him is to either get permission from the commission to execute him, or for him to retire, or to pass away from old age. But you can't just drive in there and say, hey, I'm the new boss, and so that was his claim. And he was using John Gotti as a crux because, like Vic Amuso and all the bosses, part of their cases, most of them, all of them at that time, had been charged with conspiracy to commit murder against John Gotti. And that was because he did not seek permission when Paul Castellano was murdered. And they believed that he had that involvement in it. So they all were trying to gun him down. So Nikki, of course, hey, that's why the commission wants John dead, is because, he violated, and that's what Skinny Joey's doing. And they had been hating each other. I mean, Skinny Joey allegedly shot Nikki's son, and Nikki retaliated, shot somebody. I mean, it's just a big soap opera. But that's all Nikki wanted to talk about was him. He's the boss. And he's asking Vic about it. And I mean, this was probably a year after we're together, and he comes to me and wants me to talk to Vic on his behalf to try to, get Vic to side with him. And I said, Nikki, I don't get involved with that with Vic. And, I feel out of place to say something to him. And he goes, no, Vic respects you, and you're the only guy in here that's got his ears. And so, he talked me into it. So I went to Vic and explained to Vic, this is Nikki's thinking, and I know, I don't talk to you about this stuff, but he feels he's still the boss, and he wants you to intervene, and blah, blah, blah. Said he reached out to Chin, and the Chin said that he's still the boss, and Gotti says he's still the boss. Oh, Nikki got on an event in Marion before he went to ADX. He was in Marion, Illinois, and was able to talk to John through an event, and John told him that he was still the boss, which I don't know if that's true or not, but I mean, Nikki was serious about this. Vic decided, okay, we'll look into it, and so Mike Tassetta, Jersey is they're close to the Philly guys. So Mike Tassetta sent some fillers out there to talk to some people, and they came back to Skinny Joey. And so there was some words were passed among one another, and there's, a lot of things going on. And Bobby Luisi, he was in Atlanta with us. And, he's claiming he's a soldier or whatever, I don't know what he is. But I can assure you this, that he didn't speak to Vic Amuso not one time the whole time he was in Atlanta with us. Not once. He didn't speak none of them guys. He didn't speak with Nikki, none of them. They stayed away from him. So him and a guy, Ron Previty, he was somebody from Philadelphia. They wrote a book. And in the book, they put in there that they had $1 million contract out on 3 guys that were supposed to get hit in Philly. Well, Bobby Luisi said that I put the contract out on these 3 guys on behalf of Vic and Nikki. And totally 100% made up story. It wasn't true. I heard that, and I'm like, come on, man, this guy's crazy. But yeah, they threw me under the bus, saying I did these things, and those kind of things. When law enforcement hear that, they're going to believe what people say. It's going to benefit them. I'm close to Vic Amuso, so they're going to target me. Bobby Louise was gone from prison when this book came out. Otherwise, he and I would have probably had some problems. But I ended up going to the hole, and Vic ended up going. We all went to the hole for 4.5 months because of that, because of what he wrote in that book. Under investigation. Hey, I don't care if you want to cooperate against me. Then go ahead, cooperate. I was stupid for trusting you. That's what I'd be thinking. But don't lie on me. If I sold you a pound of heroin, then that's what I sold you. But don't say I sold you 20 pounds. That's what a lot of people do, and it's just not right, So I'm in Atlanta. I'm meeting all these guys, and I become pretty close with Vic, and I'm going out to meeting guys out in the visiting room on behalf of Vic. I'm making decisions for Vic. I'm doing a lot to help him out, and creating these little businesses. We opened up some bookstores on the East Coast. We were shaking and moving. I had an unlimited checkbook at this time. I could do whatever I wanted. That's what I did all day, all night. But my brother came up to the prison to visit me. I think I've been there 8 years or something. And it's the first time he ever came to visit me in prison. So I figured somebody died or something, I go out to the visiting room, and here he's in a 3-piece suit. My brother is. So I go into to see him, and shakes to sit down, and he has a problem. He was selling drugs in Cedar Rapids, and he had a partner, a buddy that he worked with, and they had an office, and because he had a little construction business too. And so he had a safe in his office, and he had a couple $100,000 in the safe, and he shows up and the safe is empty, and he had some scales and some cameras and stuff like that in the safe. Well, his partner said the DEA came and seized everything. So my brother, intimidated. He's not going to call nobody to find out if that's true or not, so he just believes it. A couple days later, he's down in the basement of this building, and each unit that rents from upstairs has like a closet area downstairs. So he's down there in that little area looking at some stuff he had put away, and he turns and he sees something shiny, and he went behind the furnace there and looked down, and his cameras and his scales and stuff that was in the safe were there. So of course, he figured that his partner, robbed him. So he comes and tells me the story and asks me to help. And at this time, there had been rumors in town and newspaper articles and stuff like that about me, where they say that people that would get in trouble would use my name, and that, they were trying to associate me with organized crime and things like that. Though I hadn't spoke to my brother, and he thought that I was some big shot. In fact, that, was false. I said, listen, what do you want? What do you want me to do? I'm in jail. He says, well, can you go and have somebody talk to him and get my money back? And the biggest mistake of my life. I says, you know what? Can you visit tomorrow? And he said, yeah. I said, go back to your hotel, spend the night, come see me tomorrow. And don't talk to nobody about nothing. And so I go and I pull Vic up. I explained to him the situation. And I says, well, what should I do? Because at this time, I didn't need to get Vic to help me. I was in pretty tight with the Genoveses, the Gambinos, because, I just knew them all. So he says, listen, he goes, go send Joey Russo. Get a hold of Joey Russo, and you tell him to go there and get your brother's money, and tell them people they can't be taking no money from us. And we had cell phones, and so I called Joey up and said, hey, listen, I need a favor. This is the deal. Blah blah blah. And Joey said, no problem. He goes, call me in a couple hours with all the information, and I'll head out there. So my brother shows back up. I go out and I say, hey, listen, I got a guy that's going to come and talk to you. Be polite and respectful and listen to him and tell him the truth. Don't lie to him. Just, let him see what he can do. Maybe he can get some money back for you. So Joey comes into town with 2 other guys 2 days later. Before they even get there, they send out a bolo on them, looking for 3 Italian-looking Americans flying into the airport or going into a hotel. And it just so happened one of my sisters worked at the Marriott. And this fax came over from the police department. It's all about being on the lookout for these guys. So already they're marked before they even get to town. My brother opening his mouth, telling people, my brother is in the mob and he's bringing a hitman here. And, after I told him to be quiet, unbeknownst to these guys, they didn't know anything about it. So they get there and they go up to this guy's house. And as soon as they get up by the door opens and this guy stands out on his front porch with a shotgun, telling him to get off his property. So he was waiting for him. Well, this pissed Joey off. This is a young punk from Brooklyn, New York, Bath Avenue. He's crazy, yeah. And so he told Floyd, he goes, go get me 3 rental cars and some weapons. So the next morning, they're waiting on the dude, and he comes out, they kidnap him, they snatch him. They had him for about 2 minutes. Then the feds came in, and they arrested him, because they were watching him. They got arrested. Joey cooperated, and Joey had been doing some things, making some money in Iowa, and I got a case out of that, money laundering case. So my brother cooperated against me, so they took me from prison and took me to Cedar Rapids and wanted me to go in front of a grand jury. And I told them to go f themselves. I'm on that prison mentality, they'll f you. And so they let that slide and they sent me back to prison. Some more information came up and they sent me back to Cedar Rapids. Well, at this time, I can't go to the county jail there because half the jail is cooperating against me, even though I don't even know who they are, because everyone's jumping on the case. And it's a high-profile case. They got me on the TV talking about I'm in the mob, and And in the East Coast, that's nothing. But in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, it's a huge deal, They're like killing me on the TV and in the newspapers and, put me in a county jail in Vinton, Iowa. And this is like the 1940s. It's, it's like Mayberry. The jail is one hallway. That's it. On that hallway, you have 3 cells on one side and 2 or 3 on the other. So they have men on one side and women on the other. And this woman was on the side over there. And they have these food traps that you can open, they put your tray in. They would leave them open. So you can look over into the female's cell and she can look over. So I started talking to this broad. Because I've been down for 15, 16 years at this time. What's a guy going to do? He's going to start talking to the gal, Hey there, baby, how you doing? That kind of crap. And, we started talking, passing notes to one another, talking dirty, and just, I'm just wasting my time, just hanging out, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks later, we're still talking and, acting crazy. About 4:35 in the morning, 8, 9 people came and snatched me out of my cell, took me into a conference room. And then this guy got in my face talking about, we know that you've been writing her. We want those letters and you can't withhold evidence from us. And so I go crazy, I tell them all to go themselves. They ended up slamming me down and, tying me up, doing all that crazy shit because I wouldn't, because, I've been in jail. You don't come and rush me in the morning like that. What are you going to do? That afternoon, I called my lawyer and I said, hey, who the is this broad, right? And he freaked out. He goes, you don't know? I said, no, I don't know who it is. Come to find out, she was a gal that was involved in the murder of 5 people, 3 adults and 2 children. I didn't even know her name until that day they snatched me out of the room, So I discovered that it was a kind of a horrific murder, that her and her boyfriend tortured this guy, and they had 2 girls, 6-year-old and 9-year-old, and they broke the one girl's elbow, dislocated it to get this guy to talk. So the feds came to me and talked to me about this kind of stuff. And so I became a cooperating witness, a rat, on the case. I told her that I could get someone that's doing life in prison to admit to the crime, and then it would take the heat off you, and they'd have to let you go. And she went for it. I needed to know what they were wearing. She told me talking about the little kids were wearing these one-piece baby, the jumpsuit with the little zipper in them, and the booty, the feet, little kids wearing. I'm like, sick, man. It's, that was hard for me to do that. It wasn't hard for me to cooperate against her. It was just hard to sit there and try to keep a level head and hear all this crap and tell her, yeah, that's what I'd have done, and when in fact you just want to you're listening to this shit and you just want to butcher her, She ended up turning over to me the locations of the bodies and went undiscovered for 8 or 10 years or something. Listen, if it was 5 guys, I wouldn't give a f***. They could have butchered all of them. Ain't none of my business. But don't come talking to me about killing little girls and shit, and in the beginning I did it just to get them kids, get them buried, just crazy, And a lot of people wouldn't believe that, because, you're just trying to get out of jail. But guys that have been incarcerated for a long time and know the deal, of life, if you f women and kids, you can't come back from that. I did it just because of that. But then, I did think, maybe I'd get out of jail early. So I turned over the bodies, the maps. And they went and discovered that that's where they were. And so I testified on a trial against Angie, and she received the death penalty. And later it was appealed and she won, and she got just a life sentence. So I testified on her, and then I had to wait until all the appeals were done. I think I did another 14 years before I got out. But they put me in a witness unit, a protective custody unit. I was in a unit with several guys. I was with Sammy the Bull Gravano, and Sammy was not the nicest guy. I was with Carlos later. He was one of the guys that started the Medellin drug cartel. They made that movie about him, Blow. But he was there, and he's out now. He's home. I signed a non-disclosure. Even today, if I mention who was in there, I can get in trouble. But if they are part of the public domain, like Paul Schneider, who's corn-fed, Sammy the Bull, those kind of guys, that people know already, I can talk about them. But a lot of the people that I was with, I can't talk about. But, it was okay there. I did a lot of reading and just kicking back, and, that was that. There was quite a few guys that I had met through my incarceration that, enlightened me on different things in life. And, Fat Tony Salerno, Tony Ducks, even Frankie Lucasio, that's another one. This guy hated everything. He hated life. If you looked at him, he would look back at you and say, "What the f*** are you looking at?" He was just a mean man. But I got along with him well because I was in the law library, and he was on his case big time. So he'd ask me questions, and I'd try to talk to him and say as minimal as possible, because you say the wrong thing, he's going to start barking. So after about 2-3 months, I started laughing at him. All of them were, just real good people, And that's Chicago guys, that's, Philly guys, New Jersey, New York, it doesn't matter. They're all gentlemen, That's, I guess, molded me into who I am today, I ended up doing 27 years straight before I was released, and came back to Cedar Rapids. Went to the halfway house and been working ever since. Because of the Angie Johnson, they gave me a reduction of sentence for cooperation, 10-level reduction. I only needed 3 to get out. It's exciting all the way up till the last few days, then you get nervous. I didn't know what to expect. Things had changed. They had the internet, computers, I'd never been on one. I had these little throwaway cell phones in the joint, but I didn't know how to run like a Apple phone. And so that was real crazy. And the first day I got out, I had 4-hour pass. A family member took me to Walmart to grab cosmetics and, stuff you need right away, because it's right next to the halfway house. As soon as I get in there, I turned around and left. It just seemed like all these people were coming at me, and I was thinking violent things, and just it was cold sweat, and just I went back to the car. And it was, so the first couple of weeks was like that. But after that, everything was good. I got a job. In the halfway house, I worked every day 12, 13 hours just to stay out of the halfway house. And ended up being a general manager at a restaurant, and, communicating with the guests and stuff. So it was nice, to do all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so good getting out. Don't want to go back, that's for sure. What's life look like now? Well, I'm a collector of fine things. I have a tree company. You've heard of ash trees and the ash borer disease. I specialize in that. I took some classes and some courses and became certified. So I'm a specialist in disposing of them. And just in the state of Iowa, there's 50 million trees that have to be removed. So a little niche in the market, and I jumped in on it. Took some good clients, got some good contracts with the cities and counties, and plus, private individuals. And I just did a trailer park and took out 600 trees. I got involved with that. We had a derecho, a inland hurricane in Cedar Rapids, wiped out 90% of the trees in the city of Cedar Rapids. It was the worst storm in history in Iowa. It was terrible. But I started doing that then, is when I started getting into the tree business. Just to work my way since then, last 2 years. I've got a good company. I've got good contracts, $1 million contracts, actually. So I'm doing well there, and I got a bunch of guys that work for me. I hire mostly guys that are out of the halfway house or in the halfway house, try to give them some work and try to steer them in the right direction. I've got a few that's been with me for a couple of years that I've helped from the halfway house, and they're doing well, which is good. Then I do collect things. That's what I do as a hobby. I can't show you my garages and my storage facilities because you'd think I was a hoarder. But I got funny things. I got a lamp that was in the first Tarzan movie, the first edition Playboy of Marilyn Monroe. These kind of unique things, the first Mickey Mouse stuffed animal, the Tonka company, Tonka Toys. And they come out with this Volkswagens, and they were Beetles. And they only came out for a couple of years. But I have the very first one that was ever made by them. So that's pretty cool. Just things like that. I got none of this stuff's worth much, but it's fun to collect, A lot of people are surprised, doing 27 years, I'm not a gangbanger, I didn't get a bunch of tattoos. I didn't get crazy, I could have went the other way real easy. I wasn't a junkie. I mean, a lot of the guys, unfortunately, a lot of drugs in the facilities. People can say, people talk about you and stuff. Then none of that ever phases me. I could care less what anybody says. I'm just doing my thing, and I'm happy, and I surround myself with good people, and just try to do the right things in life. It took me many years to learn what responsibility is, and then standing up and taking your own, being responsible for your actions. I mean, this is important. So I wish I'd have learned that at a younger age. I was raised, I would say, in prison than being raised on the street. And I was fortunate that I was around good people. The newspapers say a lot of things about a lot of people, like, Vic and Nikki and all, they're all killers and thugs, but they're gentlemen. I mean, they're very respectful to everyone, but they teach you respect and, teach how to talk with people. And so I respect them for that, over the years, getting to know all these guys, they're all very respectful, very polite, and just, good people. Good people.